All right, so get ready because today we're going to do a deep dive into stock analysis. We're going to be looking at a company called Arista Networks.
Okay.
And they're focused on cloud networking, and their latest report is really got some interesting stuff in it.
Okay.
So just to set the stage a little bit, Arista, they provide the connections that power these massive data centers that we hear so much about. All the cloud computing, AI, all that stuff. And their latest earnings report, let's just say they're not just like keeping up with this tech boom. They are riding the waves big time.
Right.
$7 billion in revenue last year.
Wow.
Almost 20% growth.
Yeah.
And their operating margin was a healthy 47.5%. But here's where things get really interesting. The report just keeps highlighting their position in the AI market.
Okay.
They're projecting $1.5 billion in revenue from AI alone by 2025. To help us understand what that all means, we've got our expert here. What are your initial thoughts?
Well, I mean, the AI market is just exploding right now.
Right.
And what's so interesting is how Arista is positioning themselves to be like a major player in it. They're not just hyping it up. They have the technology too.
Yeah.
Specifically, like their 800 gigabit Ethernet solution,
Right.
which is designed for all that, heavy lifting that AI demands.
Right.
And then they've got the partnerships too. They're collaborating with NVIDIA.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which gives them a real edge.
Yeah, so it's not just about being in the right place at the right time. It sounds like they've got the tools and the connections to really make this happen.
Exactly. And that $1.5 billion projection, while it sounds ambitious, it actually doesn't seem that outlandish, when you consider the trajectory of AI and, how much more powerful the networks need to be.
Right. Okay, well, that all sounds really promising, but I have to admit, one thing in the report did raise a little bit of a flag for me. It's that whole customer concentration thing.
Yeah.
It seems like a pretty big chunk of their revenue comes from just two companies, Meta and Microsoft.
Right.
So doesn't that make them kind of vulnerable if something were to change?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a valid concern for sure. If either of those giants, Meta or Microsoft, were to cut back on their spending, it could definitely have a ripple effect on Arista.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a balancing act there, right? I mean, the potential of the AI market is huge, but so is the potential downside if they were to lose favor with those clients.
Okay, so what's their strategy for navigating that risk then? Are they just crossing their fingers and hoping for the best, or are they trying to branch out a little?
No. They're definitely not sitting still. They're making moves to broaden their customer base.
Okay.
So, they're expanding more in the enterprise segment. They're trying to secure some new customers like Apple, for example.
Oh, interesting.
And they're exploring other avenues for growth beyond those two big names.
Okay, so they're aware of the risk and they're doing something about it.
Yes, definitely.
That's good. That's reassuring. Okay. Let's talk about what the analysts are saying, because I was taking a look at their price targets for Arista.
Yeah.
And some of them are, they're pretty bullish.
Uh-huh.
The average target is $415.
Yeah.
Which is, that's way higher than where it's trading at right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of that optimism is tied to that growth potential of the AI market.
Yeah.
But you always have to remember that analysts, they don't have a crystal ball.
Right.
And the tech world especially can change like that.
Absolutely.
So, their predictions are based on models, they make assumptions, things can change.
Right. So we shouldn't just blindly follow the analysts, but it is good to kind of get their perspective.
Yes, exactly.
And, speaking of different opinions, the report did mention Rosenblatt Securities and how they're a little bit concerned about NVIDIA encroaching on Arista's territory a little bit.
Right. So Rosenblatt's point is that NVIDIA, with their expertise in AI, could potentially develop their own competing networking solutions.
Oh, wow.
And if that were to happen, that would be a serious challenge to Arista.
Yeah, so there's definitely some competition on the horizon. It seems like Arista has a lot going for it, but also some potential obstacles to overcome.
Exactly. It's a very complex picture, lots of opportunities, but lots of risks too.
Well, the report gave them a Hold rating. Can you explain what that really means in plain English?
Well, it's basically a cautious approach. They're saying proceed with caution.
Okay.
They acknowledge the potential, but they also see those risks.
So they're not giving a definitive thumbs up or thumbs down. They're just encouraging investors to, do their homework.
Exactly, yeah. And to do that, we really need to dig into some of those specifics of the recent earnings call.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a great place to pick up in part two. We'll do that and get a clearer picture of what's driving their performance and the challenges that they might be facing. So don't miss it.
So let's jump into those earnings call details. Cars Arista, they actually surpassed expectations in their latest quarter. Their Q4 revenue hit $1.93 billion. That's more than their own guidance.
Wow, that's impressive. It sounds like they're really on a roll.
Yeah.
But is this like a temporary thing, or are they seeing that kind of consistent growth?
Yeah, it seems like the momentum is building. If you look at the whole fiscal year, 2024, they reached $7 billion in revenue. So that's a pretty solid increase of almost 20% from the year before. And their operating margin, it was strong too, like 47.5%.
Okay, so they're not just talking the talk, they're actually delivering when it comes to those numbers.
Exactly, yeah. And they actually addressed those customer concentration concerns head on. Remember we were talking about that?
Yeah, the Meta Microsoft question. What did they have to say?
So they admitted that Meta's reduced spending last year in 2023 did have an impact, but they're predicting a rebound in 2025.
So it sounds like they're not too worried about losing them as a customer. What about like their outlook for the future? Do they say anything about where they see the growth going?
Yeah, they did. And they're pretty optimistic. They actually increased their revenue growth guidance for 2025 to about 17%. So that means they're aiming for about $8.2 billion in revenue.
Wow, that's a big jump. They sound pretty confident they can keep this going.
Yeah.
Where do they see that growth coming from? Is it all about AI?
Well, AI is definitely a big factor, but they're also doing really well in their core cloud and data center products.
Okay.
Those make up about 65% of their revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And in some areas, they've actually got over 40% market share.
Oh, wow. Those are some really impressive numbers.
Yeah, and that focus on the 800 gigabit Ethernet, which is, crucial for those AI systems, that's expected to be a big growth driver in 2025.
Okay, so AI is a big part of it, but they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. What are some of the other areas of their business that are doing well?
Well, their network adjacencies segment, which includes stuff like routing and campus solutions, that's also projected to grow. They're thinking it'll be over $1 billion in revenue from that in 2025.
So diversification is part of the plan. It sounds like they're not just relying on one particular market or technology.
Very smart. They're expanding into other markets, while also taking advantage of that AI boom.
What about their software and subscription services? Are those playing a role?
Absolutely. Those services are becoming more and more important for their revenue. I mean, they brought in over $1 billion in 2024 from those.
So they're seeing growth across multiple segments. This is all painting a pretty positive picture of how Arista's doing.
Yeah.
But we were talking about those concerns about how reliant they are on just a couple of customers.
Mm-hmm.
Did the earnings call give any more details on that?
Yeah, so their cloud and AI Titans segment, which includes Meta and Microsoft, that segment, it contributed about 48% of their total revenue last year in 2024.
Okay, so that's almost half their revenue coming from just those two. Can you break that down a little bit further?
Sure. So Microsoft and Meta each represent, over 10% concentration, with Meta accounting for 14.6% and Microsoft around 20%. And it's worth noting that Oracle is actually a new addition to the segment.
So while they are significant customers, it's not like they're the only ones in that segment. What about the other segments? How are those performing?
Their enterprise and financial segment is doing pretty well, too. It contributed about 35% of their revenue in 2024.
And what's driving that growth?
I think it's a bunch of factors, really. Their expanded sales and marketing efforts, their partner program has been really successful, and they're really focused on bringing in new customers. And they're even seeing some early signs of AI adoption within that segment, so that could lead to even more growth there.
So they are actively working on diversifying their customer base. What about their service provider segment?
That one makes up about 17% of their revenue. And it includes a new customer. You might have heard of Apple. While the demand for AI infrastructure from those traditional service providers is still kind of in the early stages.
Yeah.
Arista sees potential there for sure.
It sounds like they've got their hands in a lot of different areas. They're not just relying on one single market.
That's a really good point. They're playing it smart by diversifying across different markets, different product lines, and at the same time, they're positioning themselves as, leaders in that AI space that's growing so fast.
It's a lot to take in, but the key takeaway is that Arista Networks has been performing really well, and it looks like they're going to keep growing.
Yeah.
But as we mentioned earlier, there are some potential risks to think about.
You're exactly right. Let's talk about this in part 3. And we'll wrap up with some final thoughts on what it all means for you.
All right, so we've talked about how well Arista is doing. But as with any investment, there are risks to think about. The earnings call did highlight some challenges that they might run into.
Yeah, one challenge they talked about was the rise of what they called white box solutions.
Right, can you remind us what those are and how they might affect a company like Arista?
Sure, white box solutions are basically generic networking hardware
Right.
that companies can kind of customize with their own software. It's like a
Right.
more DIY approach, and it can be appealing, because it can be cheaper.
Right. So how is Arista responding to that pressure? Are they worried about being undercut by these cheaper options?
Well, they acknowledge that those white box vendors are out there, but they think that both models can exist.
Yeah.
Arista is betting on their stronger features, their reliability, and their customer support to set them apart and justify that higher price.
Right. It's like the difference between buying, a custom-built gaming PC versus just like a mass-produced one.
Exactly.
Sometimes you pay a little extra for the peace of mind and those specialized features.
Exactly. Another challenge they mentioned was that they expect their gross margin to go down a bit in 2025.
Hmm. That seems a little counterintuitive given how much they expect their revenue to grow.
Right. Well, they said it's because of a change in their business mix, and they've decided to absorb some tariffs related to China to help out their customers.
So they're putting their customer relationships first, even if it means a little less profit in the short term.
Exactly. It's a strategic decision and could pay off in the long run by building loyalty with those important customers. Now, let's talk about that ambitious revenue target for AI.
Right. The 1.5 billion by 2025. Is that actually realistic? Or are they getting a little ahead of themselves?
Well, it's definitely a bold target, and they did say in the earnings call that there have been some project delays, specifically with one of their key customers.
Okay.
So, whether they hit that target really depends on how well their AI offerings do and how the market develops.
So it's not a sure thing, but it's something to keep an eye on.
Huh.
Any other concerns from the earnings call that we should know about?
The last one I'll mention is that the demand from service providers for AI infrastructure is a little lower than they expected. They're seeing some activity from newer cloud providers who are building out those AI as a service offerings, but it's not as widespread as they hoped.
So another potential growth area that's still kind of in its early stages.
Exactly, yeah. It's all about potential versus reality. Arista has a good chance to benefit from that AI growth, but things can change fast in the tech world.
For sure. Okay, so we've covered a lot here. From how well Arista is doing financially to the challenges they face in this constantly changing market, let's bring it back to our listener. Why should they care about Arista Networks?
Well, whether you're an experienced investor or just starting out, understanding what's happening in tech is really important. Arista is right at the front of a major shift. They're building the infrastructure for the AI revolution, and that makes them a company worth keeping an eye on.
They're a key player in a field that's only going to get more important as time goes on.
Here's something to think about. If AI is the future and Arista is leading the way in AI networking, what does that tell us about what might happen to the company long term?
That's a great question for our listeners to consider. As always, we encourage you to do your own research and make your own decisions. And if you found this deep dive helpful, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that bell icon so you won't miss any future episodes. We're dedicated to bring you detailed analysis on lots of interesting topics, all to help you stay informed and ahead of the game. Thanks for joining us.